Hello, I'm Stephen Knight. I'm the creator of Peaky Blinders, the TV show, and I wrote, along with Benoit, a dance show called The Redemption of Thomas Shelby, which tells the story of Tommy Shelby and Grace in a way that is quite surprising and quite beautiful, and I'm going to tell you more. It was a long time ago that I first thought about doing it. It was in the 80s, and the story came from stories told to me by my mother and father, who grew up in Birmingham, in Small Heath, in the 1930s. And they were kids, and they told me, my mum, when she was 9 years old, worked for an illegal bookmaker. They used to employ children, and she used to walk down the street with a basket of washing. And people who were laying bets would walk in the other direction. They'd have the name of the horse, their code name, and some coins wrapped in paper. And as she walked by, they'd drop them in. And then she'd take them to a bookmaker who had a dog on a chain, and the chain was just long enough that you could just get round the dog, and then she'd drop the wash in and take the money. And my dad's uncles were illegal bookmakers, and they were known as the Peaky Blinders. So,
by order of the Peaky Blinders,
they experienced this as children and were in awe of these people. And then when they told me, I was a kid, so it sort of doubly mythologised the whole thing. And I always thought of it as being like the Wild West or something, you know, or like the Godfather. It's just so dramatic. I did put it forward as a treatment in the 80s to Channel 4, and they didn't want it, thankfully, because at the time there wouldn't have been the technology to make it properly. And then I went off to do movies, and then television became what it is now. Yeah. And someone said, do you have any television ideas? So I said, I've got this one. And the BBC said, yeah, let's do that. So that's how it happened. The history books will tell you that the Peaky Blinders disappeared in 1910. My parents and uncles and grandparents told me otherwise. I think history books love a pattern. They love things to make sense logically, and often they don't. So in Small Heath, there was the people who were the Peaky Blinders still around in the 20s and 30s. I remember, and lots of people I know remember, their parents saying, if you were a kid and you misbehaved, they'd say, if you do that again, the Peaky Blinders will get you. So it was very prevalent. But yes, I did want to do something about people returning from First World War. I think the First World War was a very significant change in the way people looked at the world, and I think previous to that people thought technology was making everything better, that it was curing diseases and sanitation and all these wonderful things, and then the same technology suddenly was blowing people to pieces. So I think post-war there was this great disillusionment, and I wanted to reflect that. Yeah. Working class history is not often written down or told. I did a lot of research from newspapers, and you didn't get stories about things that happened in Small Heath and Digbeth and Bordesley Green, where the poorest areas were, unless someone was actually killed, you know. And so British, I think it's different in France, but in Britain for a long time the working class were either scary or funny. You either laughed at them or you were terrified of them. And I mean, you can say they are terrifying as Peaky Blinders, but what I wanted to do was to tell a working class story where the emotions and the passions and the feelings of the people weren't cartoony, they were real, you know, and to say that here are people who are born in a particular place with a particular destiny already mapped out for them, who decide they don't want to do that and they want to change it.
Raise a hand, all those who want to strike.
I think I got in just in time before certain attitudes became very hardened. Things like cigarettes and booze. If you were pitching that series now, especially if you were pitching it to an American streamer now, you would have a great deal of difficulty. But the fact is, people smoked constantly and people did drink a lot in those days. So it's just reflecting the reality. And it is part of it now. It really is part of the whole thing, is the cigarette and the glass. In terms of film, definitely. I mean, everyone who's got any common sense always be aware of The Godfather, because that broke new ground. So that's always in one's mind, but I did want it to feel like a Western. That's why I wanted Killian to be riding a horse at the beginning with that music. And you know, the thing about the West, the Americans are very good at mythologizing their own history. So when you think about it, the West was agricultural labourers who worked with cows, who were cowboys. And yet they turned that into this huge mythology, which I think is very admirable. And I thought in Britain, it's much more difficult because you think, I can't make it. I can't mythologise Huddersfield or Birmingham or, you know, these big industrial towns. And I thought, well, why not? And so at first, I think British critics were quite confused about what is this thing. But then it just took on a life of its own, which was great. Everything below about that height is real. All of these bigger buildings at the back, they are, actually that I think is Stanley Dock. So we shot a lot of stuff at a museum in the Black Country. They call it the Black Country because in the old days there was so much smoke, everything was black. And there's a museum of the Black Country. So we shot a lot of that there with this real canal. We also shot a lot of stuff in Stanley Dock in Liverpool, which is a massive, great big warehouse building, which I think is there. But what I think has happened here is that isn't really there. That's a plate of a big dock in Liverpool that we have then added to this, which is why when I said earlier I'm glad it didn't get made in the 80s, we couldn't have done that. Yeah. It would have been impossible. So, I mean, that looks beautiful, it looks like a painting. That's all real.
Okay, that's amazing.
That street, that's where Ringo Starr was born. And the reason it survived is because Ringo Starr bought the street. And when we were filming, we used to have to stop because a coach would full of tourists from Japan or China or whatever, and somebody would start talking and say Ringo Starr was born in that house. It's an amazing street. I think it has now been knocked down. Yeah. There was a real pub that I used to go to a lot. My granddad used to play the piano in there for beer. He would play the piano and people would buy him drinks. And it was it was a very rough pub in Small Heath, which no longer functions. It's still there, but it's no longer a pub. I'm desperately trying to buy it and get people together so that we can buy it and bring it back to its former, wasn't really glory, but its former function as a pub. And before we started shooting series 1, I took Killian there and a load of my mates, because he wanted to get the accent, the Birmingham accent. So a load of my friends from around there came to the pub. We were supposed to be going to a Birmingham City match, but we never got to the match in the end because we were just drinking, telling stories and singing in the end. And Killian was recording it all, and then my mates would talk about something illegal and I'd say, turn that off, turn it off. And then Killian walked around the house listening to these stories with the Birmingham accent, and that's how he got the accent. But yeah, it's my mission to bring the Garrison back. But at Birmingham City FC now, the hospitality area for the VIPs is called the Garrison, and it's a replica of what the pub was like. There was a look, and in those days, when in places where people were very poor, especially men, owned nothing. They didn't own anything except their cigarettes or whatever. The only thing they owned was themselves. And so there was a great deal of care and attention taken. The story my dad told that was one of the ones that made me want to do this was when he was a kid, his dad, who was wounded in the First World War, his dad wanted to lay a bet and gave him the bet to my dad. He was about 9 years old, no shoes, so he's running barefoot over the cobbles with this bet. He knocks on the door where the Peaky Blinders are, the door opens, and he said there's smell of whiskey and cigarettes comes in. And he walks in terrified, and he said there are like 10 men sitting around a round table, absolutely immaculate. Shoes absolutely shining, guns, razor blades, table covered in coins in a place where there's no money. And he said all the men were drinking beer and whiskey out of jam jars, because all of that money, they wouldn't spend it on glasses or cups or anything. It was all that. And that just gave me a feeling of who these people were, which is why the style is actually realistic. They did take that amount of care about how they looked. It didn't feel like a risk at the time because we spent a lot of time, and often the editors on any show like this will use contemporary music to get the rhythm of the scene, and then they'll take it off. And it would just work so well that it didn't feel like a decision. It was like we never took the decision to get rid of it. And it works particularly well at the very, very beginning with Red Right Hand and Thomas Shelby on the horse.
In a dusty black coat with a red right hand.
And I think people very quickly got used to it. And for me, it's a way of removing the barrier of something taking place 100 years ago, where the emotion of the music is very contemporary, so the emotion of the characters feels more contemporary. David Bowie said he was a big fan, which is great. And so Killian sent him the cap that he wore for Series 1, and then he sent a photo back of himself wearing it. So. And I knew about that, and I knew that he was a fan. But then when we were putting together Series 5, I think it was, I was contacted by David Bowie's European manager saying that he's making a new album, and he'd love to see if we'd like to use any of it. And I think, wow, this is unbelievable. And she couldn't send it to me because of security. She couldn't use any system of sending it. So she came round to my house. It was between Christmas and New Year, and played me the album. And I just said, yeah, all of it, it's fantastic. And I said, he must come to the set. And she said, it's going to be tricky. And then just after New Year, I heard on the radio that he'd passed away.
Look up here, I'm in heaven.
So his wish to have the music on the series came towards the end of his life, which really, and connection that I've heard about, I don't even know if it's true, but I think the last album was called Black Star, and in Peaky, every time Tommy decides someone's got to go, he puts a black star next to their name. So whether that was a connection, I don't know. I was casting a film called Hummingbird at around the same time that Peaky was starting to get going, and I cast Jason Statham for that. But I also met with Killian, and we met for a cup of tea in Santa Monica somewhere, and just talked about the project because he'd read the script. And when you meet Killian, the person, he's not, you don't think of him as a gangster. Immediately after our meeting, he texted me and said, remember, I'm an actor. In other words, the person you just met drinking tea isn't the person who will be playing that role. And he was right. And when he shows up for the series, he's like a different human being. I wouldn't say it's thanks to Peaky Blinders, it's thanks to his ability as an actor that he gets all those awards, because he is brilliant. But I think, it did showcase what he can do. And as well as being that brilliant actor, he is a great person, and he shows up on time and he knows his lines, he's no trouble, he leads the line, he keeps the acting troupe together.
No fucking fighting!
Good. Get the fucking...
He's just brilliant, and like a lot of people, I couldn't imagine anyone other than him being Tommy Shelby.
Look at the gun. Recognise it?
It was a great tragedy. She was so young, so brilliant and talented, and such a laugh, so funny and great to have around. And brave. Well, people always say brave, but she was irrepressible. So that when she knew she was ill, she carried on, and no one else knew apart from myself and a couple of others, and refused to be slowed down by it. But then, for the series, I'd written more than half of it with Polly in it, and then as the condition got worse, it became evident that there would be less and less possibility, and then there'd be no possibility of filming. So, when you're in that situation, the last thing you're worried about is how am I going to deal with this in a television show? You just get on with it. And yeah, I mean, she's left an incredible legacy, really. Yeah.
In the border fires and the humming wires,
And it was a series of coincidences, really, and happy accidents, because we were putting together a Peaky Blinders festival in Birmingham, quite early on in the making of the series. Rambert have a tradition going back to the 1920s of taking dance to people who don't normally watch dance. So they were famous for going into working class areas and putting ballet on through the 20s and 30s. And I just thought it would be a good idea for there to be a dance piece at this festival in Digbeth. And I met Benoit, and Benoit put together this thing, because my background is absolutely not dance, absolutely not. And I was astonished at what he came up with and what the dancers did. So there was this 12-minute piece that told a story that was powerful and emotional. It was incredible. As a consequence of that, I wrote a sequence in, I think it was series 4, where Rambert visit Tommy Shelby's country house, and people get shot, but at the same time, Swan Lake is being performed. And it was wonderful to have that happening and to work with the whole troupe of Rambert and Benoit's choreography. And we sort of casually said, we should do a show, we should do a whole show. And I went for a meeting, and when I sat down at the meeting, it became obvious that they wanted me to write the story of the ballets, which I'd obviously never done before. So I just thought this was a great challenge. So I sat down and imagined what would I want. I decided the story, or we decided the story would be Tommy Shelby and Grace, a love story, which anyone who watches the show knows that she dies. So it's about the love story and then what comes after her death. And just imagined how I'd want that to be told, and then wrote it in the best way that I could. But then Benoit takes it and turns it into this magic. He turns it into this incredible event that happens on the stage, where you learn that you don't need words to tell a story. You can do it with music and movement. And in fact, telling the story of Tommy Shelby's grief and redemption after the death of Grace would have been difficult to do that as a television thing, because first of all, Tommy Shelby doesn't speak about his emotions, so there would have not been dialogue. But when you have that intimate relationship between the audience and the character on the stage, and you just watch it unfold, you watch what happens. And I think anyone who goes to the show will find out that they have had a more intimate and personal relationship with the character of Tommy Shelby than even when they watched the TV show, because it's very direct. I think dance and movement gives you the opportunity to tell the story of what's happening inside someone's head, which is, it's difficult to do with dialogue at the best of times. But when you're dealing with these men who don't speak, who don't share, who don't show, then getting inside the head is a particular, you know, to do it in particular ways. But with dance, you can do it because you know that you're watching their imagination, if you like. And so that, and the use of music, which always liberates a lot of emotions, it's a different thing, but it's a different way of telling the same story, I think. First of all, I wanted to end the first chapter of Peaky Blinders with a movie, and I wanted to do that all along. We were thinking of shooting series 7 and then COVID happened, so we sort of adjusted it a little bit and brought the film forward. So making the film, setting it in the Second World War, concludes this between the wars family story. So it begins at the end of the First World War and it ends at the beginning of the Second World War. I think there's the scene where Grace is shot. In the TV series it looked operatic, the way it was shot, and on the stage it is at sight. It's incredible, and what it does, it captures the love of Tommy and Grace, the violence of their lifestyle, the fact that Tommy is sort of cursed and he's never going to find happiness. It's all encapsulated in one gunshot and the way that it happens. And to understand the relationship between Tommy and Grace, you have to see the show on stage because you get it right there.
Do you have a rough idea of how many fake cigarettes Cillian Murphy smoked during the shooting?
I think he came up with a number. I can't remember what it was, but it is a lot. And what it is, they're herbal cigarettes.
Okay.
And what herbal cigarettes do is make you talk sort of like, you know, they change your voice. And so a lot of the Peaky is from the herbal cigarettes.
Konbini.